You're listening to TrawlCast.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 15 of TrawlCast. My name's Sean Matthews.
And I'm Seth McClellan.
Thank you guys for joining us again. We are so excited to be back and doing another episode. This week we have a fun episode. But before we get into that, I do want to say one thing. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us and sharing us and all that. It really means the world to us. And I hope everyone who's listening gets a chance to enter into our Shark Week giveaway. We try to do this every year during Shark Week or near it, so that we can tie into it as much as possible. But we love the sharks and Shark Week, so if you get a chance, go find our Facebook page or Instagram post and do what it says and get entered to win a gift certificate to the Trawl web store. But skipping over the rest of the nonsense and chicanery, Seth, what is this week's episode all about?
So this week's episode, we want to talk a little bit about funk metal, which is, you've probably seen it on a lot of our posts and logos and things on Facebook and Instagram. It's sort of the genre we've chosen to kind of represent the band, but it's kind of a very vast style and genre, and not one that everybody's super probably familiar with. So we thought it would be kind of cool to just dive into all sorts of things around that genre.
Well, and that's one thing that has come up to me in a couple different conversations since Trawl has been, going, is what is funk metal? Why do you guys call yourself funk metal? I love the term funk metal, but I don't understand necessarily, what it entails. But all these conversations always end up being the same thing. It's like, listen, funk metal is us. It's a fun music genre that we've decided to kind of jump in and throw our hats into, because everyone that's involved really has a love for like a core set of bands that we take a little bit from each of these bands. So that's something that I think you and I have talked about and wanted to discuss, is what is funk metal? Like, where did it come from? What are the origins of it? Like, some of the bands that may or may not have been like the big influencers of it, and kind of where it is or has gone. So, like, let's talk about the origins of funk metal. Like, where did it come from, Seth?
So to talk a little bit about that, I think funk metal, like, on a simple level, is kind of elements found in heavier music like distorted guitars and syncopated rhythms, but also elements of funkier music like slap bass or funk style guitar mixed in. Syncopated rhythms are also a thing in funk music, so pretty much any music that has these elements you could sort of call funk metal. But from what I've sort of read and researched, funk metal for the most part kind of has origins in like the San Francisco Bay Area of California. It almost has the same timeline and trajectory as grunge. Sort of in the late 80s, early 90s, it kind of came up through and was popular at that point. Bands like Primus, Fishbone, Mordred, Living Colour, Suicidal Tendencies, but then there's like a lot of others that are more underground that a lot of people don't know about. Scatterbrain, Urban Dance Squad, Scat Opera. There's like all these bands that, from what I've read, like in San Francisco Bay Area, thrash was a big thing. A lot of thrash came from there.
Yeah, if you think about thrash, that's the area that it really took over. I mean, Metallica is from the San Francisco area. Like the late 80s, early 90s was all thrash. And a lot of these funk bands that you're talking about in that San Francisco Bay Area, they took the elements of thrash and then they took really funky bass lines and like kind of smashed them together. And like you said, Fishbone, Primus, Faith No More, Living
Yeah.
Color, Suicidal Tendencies, like all these bands, you may know them for different things. Living Color has Cult of Personality, which is, everyone knows that song. They were one of the bands that I remember that were burning so hot and so bright, but they were just ahead of their time. Like if they would have maybe skipped ahead 4, maybe 5 years from when they started, they would have been huge, absolutely huge. So you have bands like Faith No More, which, I mean, it's Faith No More. How much can you say about it?
I think, funk metal is kind of a melting pot genre where you've got, or it's like a fusion genre where it's like literally
Right.
made up of many different styles. And Faith No More is an awesome example because they're throwing in, you can hear, heavier stuff like thrash, especially in the earlier stuff, but you can hear punk, you can hear funk, you can hear other things that literally nobody had ever kind of done before. And there was also like, they had keyboards, so they had this kind of almost like operatic kind of more
Right.
classical stuff sometimes. That's what's cool about funk metal is I think it really is.
It's a melting pot of all music.
So I thought it would be cool to talk about our entrance into funk metal as far as like when you were a kid and you were in your formative years of listening to music, like what bands from that genre were you?
Back then, when I was a kid, like funk metal, they didn't even really use that term per se because
No, well that's the thing. Yeah, it wasn't really a term that people
Right.
used or identified. So saying, I never
Yeah.
actually was like,
but
oh yeah,
I
funk metal,
know
this
from
is
when I was a kid, like my dad was a huge fan of Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I love Red Hot Chili Peppers. The Blood Sugar Sex Magic album
Yeah.
just is one of the greatest albums of all time.
it is.
But I also, grew up listening to like, bits and pieces of Faith No More. Like when I was a kid, MTV still played music.
Yeah,
So,
me too.
which that makes me fucking old.
No, absolutely.
If you remember when MTV played music and music videos, you're old. But I
fact.
mean, Faith No More had We Care a Lot and Epic. Like those were two big ones, back then. I know for me personally, like Suicidal Tendencies was a huge, thing growing up for me. Like when I started to get into heavier music and like
Yeah,
I kind of am more of. It's funny. I'm more of a punker.
I was going
which
to
is
say they're
kind of-
very punk adjacent. Yeah,
Yeah, but if you look up, like I know I peeked at the funk metal Wikipedia page. It's actually called funk punk too,
yeah,
or punk funk. I mean, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's still good music if it makes you feel good. But
absolutely.
I'm more of a punk rock kind of guy. So hearing Suicidal Tendencies and like Social Distortion and stuff like that, like they had some elements in there that could be considered, funk metal, I guess. But those were the bands that really got it for me, like especially Red Hot Chili Peppers. Like I remember hearing that Blood Sugar Sex Magic album and was like, this is great. That bass is just it completely takes away the guitars and the drums. Like you hear Flea and he's just like just slapping and the picking and the plucking, and it's always stayed in my head that one album. So I know for me that's something
Yeah,
that really connects me to funk metal is hearing that album.
yeah. That album is absolutely huge, and same here. To talk about some of the bands that I grew up with, Red Hot
Yeah.
Chili Peppers was definitely in there.
Mhm.
I don't think you can not like or love Flea if you are into funky music. It's just kind of impossible. But for me, my
Very true.
favorite of all of these bands, Primus,
Yeah.
for sure. I absolutely love Primus and Les Claypool. I own every album, all of Les Claypool's solo stuff, all of the obscure side projects that he's had, Bucket of Bernie Brains, Oysterhead, Les Claypool and the Holy Mackerel, Frog Brigade, all of that stuff. I've got I've got it all.
But that's not a bad thing, because you're showing that you're a true fan. Because I know when I really got into obscure music, stuff that wasn't necessarily played all over the place, Primus was one of the first bands I can think of that comes to mind when that like occurred. Like,
Yeah.
they weren't a metal band, they weren't a punk band, they weren't a hard rock or death metal band. They were this weird thing that just existed, that they could literally transition. They could go to a heavy metal show and be, not as heavy, but still super fun to watch live. And then
Yeah.
you go to like a hard rock show, which is not as heavy as metal, but they're still there, and they can just interchange themselves between all these different bands, and it was super awesome. And I know I'm a huge fan of Primus too, so I don't have as
Yeah.
much stuff as you, but I do like them.
I kind of go all in on like the stuff that I really love. I have always been that way too.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Sometimes to a fault, but and then I really got into Faith No More, and all of the stuff that Mike Patton has done, which he's had an amazing amount of side projects. He's done stuff with the Melvins and Maldor. He did stuff with the Executioners and Dillinger Escape Plan.
Yes.
What else? He's done a
I mean,
couple
all
of
his solo projects
albums.
in and of in and of themselves. You got Tomahawk, Mr. Bungle, Phantomos.
And Mr. Bungle is, they kind of ran parallel with Faith No More. I know that, I'm pretty sure the self-titled Mr. Bungle album came out almost the same year, or if not within a year of The Real Thing. And The Real Thing ended up being huge. The self-titled Mr. Bungle album ended up being huge. And I think Mike Patton was in his like late teens, early 20s at that time, and just like,
he was a young pup back then.
flexing these ridiculous ranges and vocals that just like nobody was doing anything quite like. And
right. Well,
and
I'll be honest, Mike Patton, when he came out with, like, when I started getting into more of the Mike Patton like world, like, I'll be honest, like, Mr. Bungle definitely has some good memories for me. Phantomos, Tomahawk, like the whole genre, like Mike Patton genre, really like caught my attention. And actually, I want to say it was probably around 2005 or maybe 2006. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he actually voiced a character in a video game called The Darkness, which was based on a comic book.
Oh, yeah.
And just his vocal was so well used in the video game, and it's one of my favorite video games from way back in the day. But like, Mike Patton can do it all, and it's so makes me so jealous. Like, I wish I could do as much as him, as well as he does it, because he is phenomenal.
Yeah, and I feel like there's an entire genre of bands that were just influenced by Mike Patton and everything that he did, because you can literally listen to, there's literally another generation of bands that you can hear Faith No More and Mr. Bungle influence in. We'll get to those later, but
oh, definitely.
Yeah, but just thinking of some other ones, Rage Against the Machine, I mean, just huge. Like, when you're a kid and when you're an angsty teenager, and like you hear Killing in the Name Up for the first time, or
Bulls on Parade, man.
Seriously,
the first time I heard that song, I wanted to start tearing down capitalism.
Yeah, seriously. And I love 311. I've got, I've been into them for many years. I love Clutch, which I would call Clutch, they're a very funky band. They might not have the traditional funk chops as like something like a Red Hot Chili Peppers, but they are a very funky band, and they've been doing it for a long time. And
I think we've talked about Clutch before on the show, though.
Oh, yeah.
And how we, we've taken some of these influences, ladies and gentlemen, like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Faith No More, Tool, Mr. Bungle, Primus, Clutch. We've taken a bunch of these people in as influences. We really love these bands, and they're, if you have never listened to them, find an album. I won't tell anyone to go listen to a specific album, but go find one for you out of some of these bands and listen to them and see what you find. You may realize it's a whole genre of music that you need more of in your life.
Yeah, man. I mean, the list goes on. I could just go on, but like, I literally found, once I started playing bass, and once I started diving deep down the rabbit hole of all of my kind of favorite artists that were obscure, weird, and just funky.
Yeah.
Obviously we grew up and were influenced by that '90s era, but what's cool about
Right.
funk metal is there's also that whole '80s era that, like,
Yeah.
there's still a lot that I don't know. There's still a lot that I haven't explored, but
Now,
it's
I'll say on the the 80s era, one thing I will say, it's not necessarily funk metal, but I'll tell you right now, P-Funk, Parliament Funkadelic,
Mm.
that shit is fucking classic.
absolutely, yeah,
I mean, it's unreal. It's so good.
yeah. That
And I mean,
there's
my
some
parents
amazing.
basically listened to everything when I was growing up. So I listened to a lot of crazy shit, and I definitely can remember some times where my dad threw on some P-Funk, and damn, that stuff lasts. Yeah, I mean, I'm 37 years old now. I'm pretty sure it's at least 35 years old. Like, I can still remember P-Funk, and
Yeah,
it's a band that is everlasting.
absolutely. Yeah, I love that stuff. The old, funk, jazz fusion stuff. The funkadelic and
Mhm.
that whole era as well. Um, but I didn't get into some of that until later. I really feel like a lot of the '90s bands were my gateway in, and then I kind of explored around and said, "What else is out there?"
So speaking of gateways, like we've talked about kind of the origins, like where some of the bands that kind of started the movement, and a lot of them. Thinking off the top of my head, I know like Red Hot Chili Peppers, they maybe curved away from it a little bit to try to become a little more mainstream and a little more poppy, which worked for them. I mean, they're hugely successful, and good on them for that.
They're one of the bands that made it out of that era and still continue to be successful, because I think you know and we can get into talking about more about this too, is one of the sad things about funk metal genre is it really kind of hit its peak around the early '90s and has been pretty
Yeah, I want to say
obscure
like
since then.
93 or 94, it really was done.
Yeah,
Like, that was it. It was a downward slope from there.
yeah. So I feel like you know Red Hot Chili Peppers have evolved. They've done a bunch of different things. I know they did their last record, The Getaway, with Danger Mouse, who's like a modern producer that does like Black Keys records and
Right.
more modern indie rock type stuff. But then you listen to I think like the title track, I think it's The Getaway. There is still a lot of funk bass in there. You can still hear Flea doing his thing. But
Oh, yeah.
th-
Flea keeps it going throughout the
yeah,
whole thing, man.
but they've stretched it out to be a little bit more modern for modern consumption, which is fine because they're
Right.
still doing it and they're still. So anyways, I'll let you keep going, but I didn't want to glaze over.
No, it's good, man. So you kind of helped me expand on that because the early 90s, mid to early 90s, was really the peak for funk metal, and then it kind of trailed off. And then from that, I think a lot of those bands that kind of had some influence on the early 90s music scenes and stuff like that, they definitely influenced one of my favorite genres and like the next coming of quote unquote metal, which was new metal.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
a lot of the bands, I mean, if you think about it, Mudvayne is one of the bands right off the top of my head.
Yeah. which is one of my favorite bands growing up. Like, as soon as I
Yeah.
heard Ryan Martin, Rhino, as soon as I heard his bass lines, it literally changed the way I play bass. Like, that album
Right.
for me was huge. Like,
And that's the thing is these new
yeah,
metal bands, you know, NU with the umlaut or whatever over the U, they were
yeah,
considered, you know, a different genre of metal because they downtuned their guitars. They used a ton of distortion. It was super heavy. There was screaming, there was singing, but then a lot of the bass players involved still had influences and had this funky, like slappy, picky, you know, bass that they just kind of not stole, but like inherited from these funk metal bands.
I feel like funk metal introduced the syncopated rhythms piece, which I think grunge also took from. I feel like
Yeah.
funk metal in ways influenced grunge, and I feel like it also influenced new metal in that once you've got these syncopated rhythms, that's kind of the way that modern music has, kind of evolved, and new metal ended up influencing a ton of other things later. I feel like it doesn't get its flowers for influencing
It doesn't.
as much as it has, but it also, like funk metal, is like a dirty word. People don't want to use it. People don't want to say
Yeah.
new metal.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
No, you're 100% right. That's one of the things that when I've very cursory research. That's going to be my word for the day is cursory research. um, when I looked it up, like literally, that was one of the things that like, you know, funk metal is kind of it's not, it's looked back on as a very fond memory, but a lot of people want to keep it that. They want to keep a fond memory. They don't want to have, you know, a revival of it, but I don't think they gave it their fair shot. And I think that's the same thing with new metal, whereas, you know, bands from that era, like Slipknot, was technically a new metal band back in the day. And if you look at them now, they're probably the highest grossing metal band there is, period. Like I think even Metallica opens for them now. Like
I was going
they're
to say,
so big.
some of the new metal bands that came out then in the early 2000s, Korn, Slipknot,
Yeah.
System of a Down, Seven Dust, POD,
Cold
Mushroom
Chamber.
Head,
Yeah,
Cold Chamber,
POD, yeah.
all ended up with these legacy careers that went pretty long. Some of the bands didn't, that changed their style quite a bit, but I think kept the core of what they do and kept their core fan base, and
Right.
kept, updating it for a new generation. And they found ways to make longevity. I feel like so many people, the tastemakers and people who write, these shitty blog articles on all of the, clickbait sites, just absolutely hate the
Yeah, man.
genre. They'll just diss the genre,
do.
say that it was, but
I
yeah,
don't remember the name of the gentleman, but I did watch a YouTube video, and I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was something to the effect of like, what is new metal and why is it suck or something like that.
ugh,
And
yeah, I
that
know.
kind of bothered me because I grew up in that era of new metal. Like I didn't get the Iron Maiden and, you know, the Rob Halford and Judas Priest. Like I didn't get the metal when I was a kid because I was, you know, a kid in the 80s.
Yeah,
I really didn't
no, me either.
hear it too much. But then growing up and finding, like you said, the angsty teen or the anger of being a, you know, 12, 13, 14-year-old kid in, you know, rural Maine. Like I needed something that showed my aggression, and I found all these crazy bands and people hate them, but they're still around and they're still doing stuff. And it's like, if people hate them, then why are they still an amazingly talented band
Yeah.
that, you know, they're still around? Like Seven Dust, I believe they're putting out a new album like
It's coming right up. They just announced it, and I think it's coming out in like October or something. But they're a
Yeah.
band that's been grinding for 20 plus years.
I think 1997 was when
Yeah.
self-titled album came out, and they're still around, folks. It's a
Yeah.
long time since the old days, and they're still here. There's bands like Mudvayne. They'll never get back together.
I wish they
But
would, but it's
I
probably
do
they
too.
probably won't. But I wish they would.
But they had a really good career, and they were another new metal band. Every time I say that, I'm using air quotes, and I feel really weird because no one can see me do that.
You're like Dr. Evil, new metal.
New metal. But that's the thing is funk metal and new metal both are like a dirty word you don't say to the tastemakers.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's like I've noticed in the last couple of years, and it's funny because like even when we had Johnny on the show last week from Alliance, he's saying that some of their new material, and they're a metalcore band,
Right.
their new material is headed back towards some new metal influences.
New metal.
And if you listen to some of the more modern metal bands and modern metalcore bands, and then go back and listen to like Korn or Slipknot or Mudvayne, they're right now seeing a little bit of a resurgence in that new metal style in other genres of metal. It's slowly creeping its way back in there. So I will say that as like
I don't know if it's creeping. I think it's becoming revived. I think people are realizing like it wasn't as bad as people made it out to be, because I remember being in high school and actually going to the Civic Center or whatever Cross Insurance Arena, whatever it's called now, like going to there to see a new metal show. I've seen Coal Chamber there. I've seen Slipknot there. I've seen Disturbed there.
Yeah.
That was
me too. Me too.
That was bigger than country back then, because country was playing shows at like the State Theater or like smaller venues, while new metal in the late 90s, early thousands were playing large, coliseums.
I saw several big shows like that at civic centers. I mean, they were putting up big numbers. I mean, in Korn, like they're still playing at that level. I mean,
for sure,
it's crazy. I mean, that stuff did sell very well, and regardless of the tastemakers or people, I feel like at some point I'm hopeful that because funk metal is the predecessor to new metal, I feel like at some point it has the some hope to come back into popularity, because it's only a matter of time before people want to hear the origin of some of the stuff that is creeping back into popularity. So
right. Well, remember, things go in cycles. So, there was, I could think of it a little bit ago that it was really popular to have like almost like a disco sound in your songs.
Yeah.
And disco is from the 70s. And then, punk was kind of making a resurgence with the pop punk movement. So, there's hope, because the new metal bands kind of took their influences, and now new funk metal bands are taking influences from old funk metal and new metal bands to become kind of it's another underground movement. And that's something that I think is really special, especially because that's what we are, one of those bands that is trying to bring back something that makes us feel good and made people feel good when it was here.
Yeah. And to talk about that a little bit, about how we arrived at.
Yeah, how did we arrive at
funk
Trawl
metal
being funk metal?
Yeah. So we were actually at our first show at Empire in Portland, and Sean and I were just talking, and we were talking about all the things that have kind of influenced me, influenced him, and the other guys in the band, Gary and Tom as well, at the time, and just talking about like how our music ended up sounding when the four of us got together. And we were like,
Right.
yeah, it's almost kind of like, funk metal. And I've never been like a super genre head in terms of like having to categorize every band into a certain genre. And I feel like there's so many exceptions to
Right.
the rule that it's almost madness anyway. Like when you look at any one band, you could be like, oh, well, they have blues elements, but then they also have funk elements, but then they also have this and that. And it's almost impossible to really box in a band because they are a product of all of the musicians that are playing the music. It's almost impossible to ever really. It's
Right.
like a living
Well,
organism.
it's also
Um,
it's also taking into consideration what they grew up being influenced by.
right.
No,
No,
some
exactly.
people, when they become musicians, they don't necessarily go into the music that they grew up listening to. And I can safely say that's something for me because I didn't really grow up listening to a lot of heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Heavy metal came much later in my, formative years. And, if I would stay the path that, what I originally as a young child was listening to, I'd be doing stuff like, Fleetwood Mac style or even country because my parents turned into huge country fans.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not me. I didn't find that.
Like the inspiration.
That didn't give me,
Yeah.
the feelings and the inspiration to make that music. What gave me, emotions and just that ASMR kind of feeling was hearing a heavy metal album and seeing the crowd reaction when I actually saw videos of people moshing and crowd surfing and the camaraderie of it. And then, branching out from
Yeah.
there, I definitely found myself influenced by a lot of different stuff. And I know you and I, Seth, have talked about a bunch of bands that we've had in common that not a lot of people maybe listen to in
Yeah.
relation to other things.
I think the other reason why, we kind of arrived at this whole funk metal thing is the fact that I've always loved to play slap bass. And, because of the way I
Right.
grew up, because of the music I listened to, as a bass player, it's very rare that you get the opportunity to really open up and play exactly what you want to play in a band. It's almost unheard of. And, when I put this band together selfishly, I was like, you know what? It would be cool to finally have a band
It's
where, like,
bass forward.
if I want to play a crazy
Yeah.
slap part, and maybe we can build the band around that. And it's kind of worked that way. And you
Yeah.
know, I will say though, there's a responsibility as a bass player to serve the song as a support instrument. And that is always important to me. So I'm not this like irresponsible bass player who just
You're just
chooses
slap
to,
bassing everywhere, man. You're just whipping it out, fucking
right,
plucking and slapping.
because there's because there's a time and
Right.
a place. That doesn't sound good all the time. It only sounds good when you can feature it, when you can serve up a moment where it makes
Right.
sense. Because I feel like at the end of the day, if you're gonna try to write good songs, you just have to, serve the song and play appropriately to make that make sense. And, but I also wanted this to be a band where, there are no limits as far as what the bass is considered. It can be a lead instrument. It can support the guitars, and a lot of times it does, because that's just what, makes for good songwriting
Right.
sometimes. But why not, present ourselves as this thing that we kind of hope to get across, which is the fun, funky, just crazy kind of idea of funk metal and what it has been in the past 20, 30 years, and see if people like that. It might be in detriment to other people who might listen to it and go like, oh, like I wouldn't have called it
Right,
that,
yeah.
or some people hear metal and they run for the hills because they're like, I know I don't like
Right,
metal,
yeah.
but sometimes I feel like it's kind of a clumsy
Well,
term
no.
because funk metal isn't necessarily always metal in
Right.
a traditional sense. And like, what is metal anyway? Because it's like metal can be 100 different
Yeah.
genres depending
Well,
on more than, so it's like,
So that's something though that
it's so
you
hard
know,
when you talking about labels, it's so hard to
right.
really, you don't know if you're serving yourself well, or if you're, setting yourself back by aligning with a
Right.
genre.
Well, and
But
that's, just that term
yeah,
funk metal, when we kind of stuck with it and we jumped with it, that was one thing that I thought of, like when we were talking about it and like where we wanted to do. For me, funk metal is definitely a bass driven music, and letting you kind of run free. You always support the songs when they need support, but there's always opportunities to have you sitting there, you know, plucking and slapping and putting some crazy grooves in there. And I think that's what really made me feel good about the term funk metal. Now, we may not sound exactly like some of the older funk metal bands, like we may be a little
no,
heavier
yeah,
than that, but that's the term funk metal. It's not, like funk metal. Like it's a very, you know, we keep the funk and the metal there next to each other because it works. Like your bass lines are definitely funky. There's, the feel of them, the flow of them, the emotion of them is very funky. And then, maybe my vocals are a little more metal than they should be, but you know, that's just because that I'm putting the little bit heavier.
well, that's, I think,
I'm the emphasis on the metal. You're the
yeah,
emphasis on the funk. And with our current lineup with Gary and Justin, it's definitely taken
yeah.
there's a good clean mix of funk metal. I don't want to sound like a dick, but I really don't care what the tastemakers are saying these days, because realistically, if funk metal wants to make a comeback, I think it needs to start now. And I think that's kind of a good segue into, I guess new friends of ours that, we want to kind of give some
Yeah.
love to and stuff, and just give shout outs to certain things.
First of all, I'll agree with you. Like, I don't care what anyone says. I almost see it as a challenge that,
Yes.
the style of music that we've chosen is not popular. I see that as a challenge to show people and celebrate a style of music that is under celebrated or unsung, because it's worthy, and I love the
Oh,
genre,
yeah.
and I think that there's so much potential. So we've been trying to kind of build a community around, other bands that might be out there that kind of have that style, and they might not self-identify themselves
Yeah.
as funk metal. That's the hard
Well,
part,
and
is you don't always know where to find them or how to
yeah,
find them, because they might
it's
not.
they may just be like a band that, they have funk and like a couple different other adjectives in there, and then metal is further down the line. Like that's how they describe themselves. But if you listen to it, you're like, yeah, that's funk metal. And I, this kind of
Yeah.
thing that you and I have kind of been nurturing here. Um, I'd like to call it the funk metal revival, but
All right. So let it be written.
yeah, hashtag funk metal revival, people.
Okay. All right. Yes. Hashtag funk metal revival. That's how we'll find you. If you're listening to
Yes,
this and you're a band
hit us up. Yeah,
like
and that's
that,
the thing is we've been
hit us
making
up.
friends with bands from literally all over the world, ladies and gentlemen. One of our new, I'd say, good friends, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've been following each other for the past, I'd say, year and a
Yeah,
half, to
it's
some
it's been
degree.
one of those things where we've
Yeah.
kind of kept our eye on each other, just kind of gently nodding, like, okay, I see what you're doing over there, and it's been building and building and building, and finally, um, our friends in Pink Octopus finally put out a great EP.
Absolutely. It's an awesome EP. Congrats to
Hell
those
yes.
guys. I know that they, I think they're kind of in the same point in their, you know, journey as we are, where they've been a band a few years. It took them a little while to get some recordings out, and more people are taking notice because they've put out a little bit of a body of work, and I think it's awesome.
It's a fantastic EP. It really is. Like when it came out, man, I blasted it for like 4 or 5 straight days. Like that's all I listened to. It was unbelievably good.
Those guys are from Australia. I think they're from Sydney.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Raph from Pink Octopus, Sydney, Australia. You are listening to TrawlCast. Where have you gone? I've been looking for you all day long. Hey, my darling, you left me away. All I want is that you're here with me.
Australia actually has a couple more amazing funk metal bands that are a little bigger, that are a little bit beyond our ability to be friends with them. But 12 Foot Ninja, who is one of my favorite modern, funk metal bands, or whatever you would want to call them. Some people call them, they're in kind of the gent genre, but I feel like there's so much more than that.
Let's just keep it going. They're funk metal, baby.
Yeah. And then Osaka Punch, who I kind of turned you on to recently.
Absolutely.
They've got a couple of albums. They're also from Australia. So I feel like we're on the wrong continent. I feel like
no doubt, man.
Australia knows what's up.
I think that's maybe that's a calling for when us as stupid Americans get a chance to travel again. Like I think it might be a good idea to go to Australia and do a tour, because it seems like the funk metal scene is alive and thriving down under.
That continent, for whatever reason, just gets it. Like, there's a lot of hard rock, funk metal bands from that continent that just are slaying, and they absolutely get it. Like,
oh, definitely.
So yeah, someday I really want to go there. Another band, another small, I would say, local to their area band that we just discovered. There's a band from London called Breakfast Epiphanies, which I love that name.
Yes, yes.
They literally just put out an EP today. Actually, today. It's a little 2-song EP. They have, like I said, just 2 songs. Really inventive, crazy, strange. I think,
phenomenal is another term for that.
Yeah, phenomenal. I mean, all of those words are endearing terms to me, because I think wacky and strange are endearing terms, because I think that's one of the things that I strive for in what I'm doing. Is it's like, I love any music that's left of center, and I feel like funk metal kind of embodies that. It's like, we could just play straight ahead radio rock, but why would we do that when we can throw in
it's not
slap
as much
bass
fun.
and we're it's not, man. Like, everybody's doing that. Why would I want to do that? So, and there's nothing wrong with that. Other bands that are doing that, like, we're not saying that we're better or superior in any way to those bands. We're just talking about what we love to do, and what makes us excited about music is those twists and turns and doing something unexpected. For me, with how I write and how I think about music with slap bass and the more kind of aggressive bass style, has definitely been a choice that has in some ways made life harder, and caused me to have to make some tough choices, or like, I'll share the first band I was in when I was in high school. I actually, I had started playing bass, and maybe 5 or 6 months later, some guys from my high school were throwing together a band, and I and I joined up, and about 6 months into it, they ended up like firing me. They ended up just like letting me go because I was slap bassing all over everything, and I did not have the time and place, instincts and songwriting ability that I might have today, being over 20 years into playing music. But I thought like this is exactly what I want to do, and like they were more of like the indie rock, like they were playing like Green Day and like the radio rock at the time and stuff that like was totally the opposite of that. And honestly, looking back on it, I held that for a long time. Like I can't believe that like that happened to me. But at the same time, I realize now that like sometimes unapologetically being yourself with what you want to do, you're going to find out where you need to be. And that wasn't where I needed to be. I needed to be with, other musicians who thought the same way as I did. And shortly after that, I joined up with a band that had been out of high school for a few years, and they were influenced by like all the new metal stuff and like Suicidal Tendencies and Korn and System of a Down, and like they loved my heavy, funky bass style, and they were like, "Fuck yeah, this is amazing!" Like where like they were excited for me to play that style, but like sometimes you can.
Oh, that's great.
Like learn who you are or learn where you need to be by just being yourself. And like, the high school bands, I still talk to some of those guys, and like they ended up finding a guy who, was all about playing that stuff, and hey, it worked out, and the rest is history. But it's like, you gotta have a little bravery to be yourself, and sometimes that's tough, and so that was just kind of a lesson for me early on that I think I'm really glad that I followed what I love and pursued what I love, and I think that's why I'm still doing it, is because I've never let that idea and that thought go. Like I love playing funky bass, and I was finally, after many, many, many years, able to put together Trawl, which is able to allow me to do that. So anyways, that's...
Oh, for sure, man. And that's the thing. Is like, I love when you play funky shit, man.
Thanks, man.
I want to sound selfish as hell right now. It's one of my favorite things. And I want, every practice we come in there and we start jamming. And I mean, just this lineup we currently have, it feels really good because we're taking the songs, we're still practicing them. We're kind of, because of the pandemic and the time that we've had off, like I know we've each kind of taken our parts and maybe spiced them up a little, or tweak things here and there.
Yeah, I've been working with Gary a lot. Like we've been just dissecting rhythm section parts and saying, all right, Gary, I'm hitting this accent. You need to line up with me here, or hey, what are you doing there? I want to make sure I line up with you there. I think having those conversations are what makes everything tighter, because like you just need to communicate that stuff and like geek out on.
Well, and I know for me, having that time off, I've been working on, the lyrics. Maybe, anyone who's seen us play live, our song Running Home, I've worked on maybe changing the attack of my voice on certain parts to, maybe just emphasize it a little more, give it a little more flavor.
Yeah.
And that's something that, I think we've all done and we're really enjoying, is we're kind of evolving the songs a little bit, because I know there's actually a video on YouTube of the first time, our first show ever.
Yeah.
The first time we ever played Vertigo.
Right.
And
it's very different.
You can watch
now,
that.
Yeah.
And then, you see the evolution of it, and that's, about a year after, like, you see the evolution of what we did, what we, decided we wanted to evolve in that song. And that's something that I really like, is, what we're doing now, we're evolving the music a little bit at a time, and it's fun.
Yeah.
It really is fun, man.
No, absolutely. I feel like we always, I'm always like in pre-production mode, because I always think of everything in terms of a recording. I always think about it like how it's going to be live, but we record pretty much every practice, and we listen back to the songs, and then I'm always listening for, okay, now that I'm not playing this part, I can listen to all the other elements and go, am I where I need to be on this part, or do I have any suggestions for the rest of the band on how all of this sounds together? And I feel like if you're always doing that, you're incrementally in very small ways, like changing the song to be hopefully a better song if you're like listening back.
Oh, for sure, man. Yeah.
The thing is like we all work, we have full-time jobs, we, have busy lives, and we're lucky that we can get together once a week and practice. But listening back allows you to really, like, we can only play the songs once or twice a piece at practice, but when we're in between practice, I can listen to everything 10 times, and I didn't have to play it and hurt my hands. I can just listen back and go, all right, now that's what I want to, so I think there's a lot of value in that.
I feel
too.
that.
We're not.
I definitely feel that because my voice could take a break. There's some practices where I make it 5-6 songs in. Maybe the jam room's a little hot. Maybe the moisture in the air is messing with me. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just know that my voice is definitely hurting. So getting a break and being able to listen to things and take my time, and I love the fact that we record our practices. It's been a real godsend to be able to do that, because sometimes an idea comes up while we're at practice and none of us can remember it, but then we listen back to the recording and it was like, oh, it's right here.
Yeah.
This is the part you were talking about, adjusting or tweaking, and
no, it's exactly.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's hard to play the same thing twice if you had that idea and it just floated away. But the recorder's the best thing if you can capture it.
Yeah. Well, it helps too when you've had a couple, nightcaps during practice.
Yeah.
Couple White Claws in, and we're getting a little,
couple
forgetful.
claws in, couple whites, couple spritzers.
Spritzes, yes. I know you and I got added to a funk metal group on Facebook, which is really cool.
Yeah, I found this funk metal group on Facebook. There's some really knowledgeable people in there that know a lot more than I do about the earlier parts of the genre. And like, I listen to the stuff that people post all the time. The group is only like 85 members. If you want to be a part of it, hit me up or hit Sean up and we can add you to it.
For sure.
It's cool because everybody in there, even though it's only 80 people right now, all kind of share that sentiment of like loving this funky music. So I love that.
And the group shares all kinds of crazy stuff that, some of the stuff I've never even heard of ever. And all of a sudden I'm listening, like I got them up on Spotify, or I found them on YouTube or whatever. And it's like, wow, these guys are really good. They actually reminded me of I think it's Send Me Your Money by Suicidal Tendencies, which is such a funk metal. It's like literally the epitome of funk metal. And I forgot that's kind of why I brought them up a couple times, is because that song really did kind of get me into that kind of funky bass thing.
Yeah.
And they just happened to remind me of it in that thing. It's like, holy shit, that's right.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's cool. And there's a couple of funk metal playlists on Spotify that have also found us and put us on. There's one that's just called Funk Rock. It's a pretty big playlist. There's like over 500 followers. We're on that. There's a new one that actually the guys from Pink Octopus, Raph put together a funk metal party playlist that is out there. There's a couple more. So we're slowly finding this community for what we're doing. There are people out there that love it.
Yeah, and if you want to be one of those people that love it, hit us up. We'll throw you in to the group. You can find more funk metal in your life,
Yeah.
I'm personally excited about it because I've been enjoying it. I don't post as much on Facebook or Instagram, but I'm there. I'm a creeper. I'm in the background. I do, man. I just sit back. I try not to get involved in any craziness because it's just easier
Seriously.
to sit back and let people, go nuts. And then I enjoy my notifications when I see, I think it's Vlad is one of the
Yeah.
guys. He posts a ton of
posts a
stuff in
ton.
there, and I love, looking it up and saying, oh shit, this is cool. Oh shit, this is cool. Like every time something comes up, I'm like, oh man, that's so good. And like, the reminders of stuff like Parliament Funkadelic, I haven't listened to in a while, and that group on Facebook definitely. I spent a couple hours at work the other day just blasting P-Funk.
That's awesome,
and
man.
My boss was like, what the fuck are you listening to? I'm like, dude, don't you, no, go away, go away. This is my time right now. And I just had a great day at work. It felt really good.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's really hard to be in a bad mood listening to that stuff, and that's another reason why I love
really
it. Like,
is.
I think, like fundamentally as a person, like I just, and you guys kind of know, I'm kind of like Mr. Rogers. Like I don't, just like my personality or whatever. Like I have a hard time being like just like a negative, downtrodden person. Like I feel like happier, funkier music is like, like riding a jet ski. Like you can't be not happy while you're riding a jet ski. Like it's just, like
That's a great analogy. Yeah,
I've never seen someone frowning.
I don't think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's never been an angry person on a jet ski. They always have a biggest shit-eating grin.
Yeah.
And they're just like, yeah, jet ski.
But so that's another piece of it. It's just like fundamentally, the vibrations that you're throwing out into the world that are going to vibrate out into space and be there forever are, kind of define you, define what you choose to do with your life and what you choose to put out into the world. And I would rather that be positive stuff. So
I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone. The good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful. But we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much, feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think that pretty much covers funk metal and the hashtag funk metal revival movement that is now going on thanks to people around the world who are still finding love for the genre. And speaking of around the world, I do want to say hello to our friends in the Netherlands again and our friends in Australia that listen, and Germany, and now our Ireland friends that are tuning in and listening to TrawlCast on a bi-weekly basis or whenever they get an episode or build up. I want to say hello and thank you for tuning in. We greatly appreciate you guys listening to us. And that being said, thank you all for tuning into TrawlCast. If you like what you hear, we are available on Anchor, Apple Podcast, Breaker, Google Podcast, Outcast, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, and Spotify, and many, many others. We're also available on YouTube. Search for TrawlCast. Once you find us, hit that subscribe button. All I can say about that is right now, ladies and gentlemen, we are running our Shark Week giveaway. I know one of the stipulations is you have to be a subscriber to YouTube. So get in there, hit that subscribe button to our YouTube channel so that you can, possibly win a gift certificate to our web store. If you can, rate and review us 5 stars. Give them a little write-up. Tell them what you like, what you don't like, what you want to hear, what you don't want to hear. If you do have a question, comment, show suggestion, or want to send in a listener question or segue or whatever via email, cast a line to us at trawlband@gmail.com. For more information on all things Trawl and Trawl related, all you got to do is go to www.trawlband.com. You'll find all the stuff there. It also has links to our web store, so you can go check out some shirts or, I think we have sweatshirts on there now, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Oh, yeah,
We have
sweatshirts.
5 different designs up there.
Oh, 5 designs, ladies and gentlemen. Come on. So go to trawlband.com. The link's there for our web store. I know it's August right now, but fall and winter is coming. If you live in an area that gets a little chilly and you need a new sweatshirt, you could get your favorite Trawl logo on it. All right, again, thank you for listening. My name's Sean Matthews.
I'm Seth McClellan.
This has been TrawlCast. We'll see you next time. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, #Funk Metal Revival.